I'll just check.
Just checking.
Yeah, we are.
Lovely. Welcome everybody to the meeting of the West Yorkshire Transport Committee. We have a full house, which is nice to see. I'm happy to go around the table and just introduce ourselves. My name is Susan Hinchcliffe. I'm leader of Bradford and chair of West Yorkshire Transport Committee. Peter Carlisle, who are you?
Good afternoon, Councillor Peter Carlisle, Councillor in Leeds, but I'm here as one of the deputy chairs of the Transport Committee.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Abdul Hanan for Headingley High Park in Leeds.
Eric Firth, Kirklees Council.
In transition. Because obviously going to the deputy chair to come, but obviously we've got to go through the process yet. Councillor Page.
Thank you, Chair. Scott Pation, Calderdale Council, Member for London and Footward, and Cabinet Member, Climate Action, Housing and Transport.
Hi, Councillor Taid Salam, Bradford Council, and a bus driver.
Councillor Colin Hutchinson from Calderdale.
Councillor Axel Shaw, Portfolio Holder for Regeneration, Planning and Transport on Bradford Council.
Councillor Matthew Morley, Cabinet Member for Planning and Highways, Wakefield Council.
Councillor Aman Khan, Wakefield Council.
Hi, Kerry Peters, Regional Director for Northern.
Good afternoon, Darren Allsop, Stakeholder Manager for Northern Trains.
Hi everybody, Kaylee Ingham, I'm Commercial Director for First Bus North and West Yorkshire.
Hi, I'm George Thomas from Transpennine Express.
Hi, Melissa Farmer, Regional Development Manager of Transpennine Express.
Hi, Kim Kane, Commercial Director for Aviva in the North Eastern Yorkshire.
Martin Bolt, Kirklees Council, Murfield Ward. It feels like I'm almost sitting as soon as we're that far away.
Neil Buckley, Councillor for Woodley Ward in Leeds.
Peter Caffrey, Calderdale Council.
Councillor Anna Heaton, Holbeck Ward in Leeds.
Councillor Amar Anwar, Kirklees Council.
Councillor Oliver Edwards, Guyseam Rawdon in Leeds City Council.
Councillor Matthew McLaughlin from the Colne Valley Ward in Kirklees.
Hi everyone, Andy Fitzpatrick, Research and Spatial Intelligence Manager from the Combined Authority.
Hi everyone, Mick Bunting, Interim Director of Transport Operations and Service Transformation, Combined Authority.
Good afternoon, I'm Dave Haskins, I'm the Interim Director of Passenger Experience and Assets of the Combined Authority.
Good afternoon, I'm Luke Albanese, I'm Director of Mass Transit for the Combined Authority.
I'm Melanie Corcoran, Director of Transport Policy and Delivery for the Combined Authority.
And we got there. I'm Simon Woodson, Executive Director for Transport.
Lovely, thank you very much. We do have some apologies, which are...
So we have apologies from Councillor Hussain, Councillor Kilbane and Councillor Williamson.
I say Councillor Rowe as well is also like the apology today, I think, probably.
No problem.
Apologies came through to me, and I think they were passed through to Wycliffe for Councillor Hayden as well, who couldn't make it.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So we have the agenda in front of us. I think just from a microphone point of view, when you've stopped speaking, you need to press the button again, because then other people can speak. That's how it works. We just have to get used to it. So any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interest for anybody? No? Councillor Salam?
There is buses mentioned in here and I work for operator.
Thank you, Councillor Salam, declaring that he works for First Bus, but that is obviously in your declaration anyway, isn't it, Councillor Salam? So that's just belt and braces that you mentioned in that. Thank you very much. Anybody else, anything to declare? No? Lovely, thank you very much. Next item then, exempt information, possible exclusion of present purpose, is that required?
I don't think we have anything forward today.
We don't need anything today. Minutes of the meeting of the Transport Committee held on 27th of July. Those have been circulated, I believe. Yes. Well, it says 7th of July on mine.
It was the 7th of July, yes.
Yes, that's probably wrong there. So 7th of July. Those are in front of us. Is everybody happy with those? Any comments, questions? No? Lovely. Those are passed as a correct record then, everybody. Thank you very much. And then we move on to the first item on the agenda, which I believe is passenger experience update. And Dave Haskins, you're going to start this off. And then I think we're going to Andrew, is it? And then we're going to go to the operators, which we're very pleased to see here today. Thank you very much for coming.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hinchcliffe. I'll introduce this passenger experience report, which provides an overview of a number of key topics as set out in 1.2 of the report. In terms of, as you just said, in terms of the passenger satisfaction attitudes, my colleague Andrew Fitzgerald will provide a brief overview of some key findings that we hope will be of interest. So, as we said, we've got the bus and rail operators present for this item, and the intention is that the two of us will give our overview and then open up to questions afterwards. Either for the combined authority officers or for the operators. That is. The expectation is that the scope of questions will largely relate to information presented in the report, though we do recognise there may be some wider topics where members may want to probe a bit further. And then we'll collectively seek to respond to the questions in the meeting, though obviously there may be some we have to take away, so I hope you recognise that this may be the case. Onto the report itself, is to note that in the future we will be looking at how to present the information better that goes into this report, including what is both useful and important to all of you here. So any feedback on this is welcomed from members. And also, rather than walk through reports sequentially, in light of what I've just said, first I'll cover rail, then I'll cover bus. So I'll reference the paragraphs I'm talking about because it does jump over the place a little bit. So firstly, in terms of key headlines, in terms of rail and network/patronage, 2.4 of the report onwards references Northern's recovery to about 83% of pre-pandemic levels in terms of patronage. As a comparison, TPE are about 75, LNER 85, and cross-country about 70%. Leeds Station footfall overall is about 63%, although there has been some impact of the strikes in recent months, as I'm sure you're aware. In terms of timetable changes, from Northern, which is in 225 of the report, there's some timetable changes coming up on the 10th of December, which are limited in terms of the number of impacts which are listed in the report, but also they do impact, it's fair to say, despite being limited. For TPE, it's covered in 226 onwards of the report. The June timetable introduced some additional Sunday services, including a number between Huddersfield and Manchester. December timetable changes coming up, and the intention is to operate a temporary reduced emergency timetable, and the principle is to give greater reliability and therefore certainty to the passengers while TransPennine are able to get themselves into a more stable environment. This could be for up to a year in length. This approach is broadly welcomed by us as it is better for the passengers, but there is some wider concern about the mooted proposal of withdrawal of a number of trains or carriages from TP operation. It's fair to say that since this report was published, some additional information was provided at the Rail North Committee in the last few days, and TPE are here and they're able to give us a further update as required when we get onto the questions. In terms of the rail network as well, punctuality in 235 onwards, there's been an impact due to rail strikes as stated. Punctuality for Northern is slightly down at 81.5% and TP is at 69.5%. And in terms of cancellations, Northern has a slight increase at 4.4% and TP at 5.1%. This is a decrease, as I said, but does exclude a level of what's called P-coding, where trains are cancelled on the day before. And rail network enhancements in 244 of the report, as I'm sure members are aware, there's a lot of planning going on around the TransPennine route upgrade, and a Transport and Works Act order has been submitted by Network Rail for the Leeds to Micklefield section. The Combined Authority are supportive of the TransPennine route upgrade and recognise that this will have a number of impacts in coming years, some quite significant impacts as the work goes on. We are working closely with TRU on those impacts, in particular at the moment where buses might be affected and impacted by closures, and we're making sure there's some very clear communication in the timings of disruption. The other element of the report in terms of rail that's listed in 216 onwards relates to the recent consultation around the rail station ticket office closure. This took place over the summer and was after significant pressure from public and media and politicians, was extended until the start of September. The West Yorkshire districts have been involved in providing views on this to the Combined Authority and to Transport for the North. Our position as a combined authority is that the information provided was grossly inadequate, and it showed little evidence of social inequalities impacts as part of the proposals. It does, as it's set out, have a number of significant impacts for West Yorkshire stations, whereby only 3 of the 19 currently staffed stations would retain their ticket office, with the sword of Damocles potentially hanging over Huddersfield as well on their office. This represents, as far as we've established, a reduction of about 59% of full-time equivalent staffing, Monday to Friday, including reduced hours. The regional mayors, as a part of this, have launched what's called a pre-action legal process, with a view that what the consultation is in breach of Section 29 of the Railways Act, and that gets quite complicated and legalistic, so I won't go into it here, but that is ongoing. Finally, we do understand they've had over 600,000 responses to this consultation, which is the largest ever for this type of consultation. And Transport Focus is now collating the responses and due to go back to the train operating companies on the 6th of October, so we'll watch this space. Moving on to bus, 2.1 of the report highlights patronage patterns, and the weekday patronage overall, this is at the start of the summer, was about 2/3 of pre-pandemic levels. Within this, there's some variations, such as adult single ticket sales being higher at 76% compared to about 71% a year ago. There may be some impacts of mayor's fares within that as well. Senior pass level is steady at about 67%. In terms of network changes in 2011 onwards, the bus services were sustained through and post-pandemic by government funding, which is called the Bus Recovery Grant, which was this has been partially offset now by what's known as BSIP Plus, the Bus Service Improvement Plan Plus funding, which has a focus on the protection and reinstatement of services. And there's recognition that the operators need to adapt their networks to respond to this, because the word partially is important there. It wasn't fully offset in terms of the level of funding that's been made available. On a wider point to that, though, it's notable that though the bus network has reduced from what it was 10 years ago to about 79% of that level in West Yorkshire, this is still generally a more favourable position than in the other authorities, other sort of combined authorities across Britain, such as Greater Manchester. And this recognises the strong collaborative work that we've been doing as a combined authority with the operators to sustain this position. And a lot of work has been done over the summer that largely goes unrecognised to get to that point. In terms of wider initiatives around the BSIP work, Keighley and airline services were introduced on the 3rd of September, and we're also looking at options of a similar nature in the Wakefield area. And I think there's a link to latest bus service changes in the report as well. My final points around network performance in 232, where the reliability and punctuality figures are set out. There's an industry target for 99.5% of registered mileage to be operated and 95% of buses to run on time. Whilst the figures in the report are aggregated, they do fall below these expectations at present, but again, we're trying to work closely with the operators. So that summarises the first part of the report. I'll now hand on to Andrew, who will provide an overview of the passenger satisfaction and attitude elements of the report.
Great, thanks Dave. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully this will appear. So this relates to section 2.51 of the report. I've got 8 slides, so I'll whiz through these, but hopefully give you a bit of a visual flavour of the results. So every year we undertake an annual public perceptions of transport survey, and that is a representative sample of 1,800 West Yorkshire residents aged 16 and over, representative in terms of age, gender, district, ethnicity and disability, so it's a pretty solid sample. We ask a variety of questions on here, but this survey acts as a barometer for kind of key strategies, including the transport strategy, including the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement, state of the region as well, which you might be aware of, as well as the bus strategy and the bus information strategy. So I'm going to whiz through some slides here. So we ask here about, we ask everybody about the importance and satisfaction of a range of different measures. The ones I'm showing on screen are affordability of motoring at the top and affordability of public transport, followed by local bus services. So we can see here that affordability of public transport on a scale of 1 to 10, this is a score of 1 to 10, has increased. You can see that that chart on the top right there, whilst affordability of motoring has declined. So that's interesting in relation to the cost of living crisis. What's more challenging here is the satisfaction scores for the local bus services. You can see that's 5.9, where my cursor is the lowest it's been since we've been undertaking this survey. But also satisfaction with local train services has also fallen. As well as satisfaction, we asked about importance. One thing I wanted to focus on here was just to give you a flavour of the demographics underneath the survey, is different respondents' views about the importance of local bus services. So that varies by demographic group. So self-reported rated importance is highest for women. It's highest for residents who are over 65. It's higher for residents living in the most deprived neighbourhoods, and that's quite interesting because we know that 43% of people living in the most deprived neighbourhoods don't have access to a car. Local bus services importance is higher for residents in full-time education and also regular bus users. So as well as asking about importance satisfaction of a range of different indicators, we also ask about mode share as well. So here I'm showing the results from a few years ago in 2019 and 20 alongside the most recent results in 2022-2023 for each of the different modes. The darkest green on this chart shows self-reported use weekly. Okay, so there's some key things to look at here. What we can see is that for people who say that they drive a car at least weekly, you can see that for pre-pandemic versus now, it's fairly similar to what it was. However, for those people who reported catching a bus at least weekly, the darkest green, you can see a fall from 39% to 31%. You can also see a fall in people who use a taxi weekly, and this potentially reflects again the cost of living crisis. A fall of 25% of people saying they use a taxi weekly, down to 14%. Train is very similar to what it was pre-pandemic, and cycling a lower portion, but similar to what it was pre-pandemic too. Just to dive into that a little bit further, this next slide here shows some detail by at least age group anyway. So the things that are to draw your attention to on here, so same principle again, the darkest green is use, self-reported use weekly. So here we can see that actually compared to pre-pandemic, you can see this decline in bus use. So for younger people, use that phrase cautiously, 16 to 34, you can see a 7 percentage point decline from pre-pandemic. Whereas for older people, those aged 65, you can see a much higher proportionate drop. And this aligns with research published by Transport Focus recently. In fact, they found that people were taking fewer leisure trips, so just travelling much less in general. And you can also see again the fact that in this case in particular, younger people, 16 to 34, there's a higher proportionate drop in those using a taxi. So other things we asked about to draw attention to on the survey, we asked about confidence purchasing the best value ticket. So here, top chart shows confidence purchasing the best value bus ticket, and the bottom chart shows train tickets. So just to draw attention to bus ticket, what we can see is 69% of people reported being either very or fairly confident buying best value bus tickets. And this is for everybody, the entire sample. But actually, if you drill down a bit further, this rises to 85% for regular bus users, people who are using the bus weekly. So that's quite a reasonably high percentage. And you can see this uptick. Now, you need to be cautious here, but one could attribute that to the potential, the intervention of the fare capping work in relation to mayor's fares. People becoming more confident that there's in buying the best value ticket. Other elements to look at, and I'm almost there, is that we measure a range of other metrics. I thought this one was interesting to show. So we look at people's self-reported satisfaction of purchasing a ticket, the helpfulness of bus drivers, the ticket price, frequency, and punctuality. So similar to before, we've got the darkest colour there is the proportion who are satisfied. They're the ones who say they're satisfied. And on the right-hand side, you can see the percentage point shift from the survey that was conducted pre-pandemic, 2019-20. So we can see here, 72% of respondents so they're satisfied with the ease of purchasing a ticket, and this has increased by 7 percentage points since pre-pandemic. So there's progress there. Also notable to say that the majority of people are satisfied with the helpfulness of bus drivers. The state of, or people's perceptions about the state of bus stops has also improved by 7 percentage points. What's a bit more challenging is people's perceptions about the frequency of local bus. So 7 percentage point decline in the proportionate share of people who are satisfied with frequency. That 36% of people satisfied with bus frequency. Last two slides. Other things we ask about are awareness of information sources. We also ask about satisfaction. So similar to before, we're showing a percentage point shift from pre-pandemic. I thought this was worth highlighting. We've got an increase in the number of people, or the proportionate share of people who are aware of electronic displays. So the real-time displays at bus stops and stations has been quite significant investment in those. Also greater awareness in relation to train time information. What's a bit more challenging is you see kind of in ranking awareness order a reduction in awareness of Metroline call centre and Metro Messenger. Alongside this, there's lots more detail in the full report that covers satisfaction. Last slide from me, in relation to the Mayor's pledge about the safety of women and girls. For the last couple of years, we've included a question in relation to confidence in personal safety when travelling on public transport. So this slide, let me break it down for you, shows people's responses in terms of how confident they felt travelling either during the day or at dark on both bus and train by gender. So females are coloured in teal here and males are covered in black. And what we can see is that there's a stark difference between daytime, where my cursor is here, via bus, and nighttime self-reported confidence in personal safety. And what I've done is I've overlaid last year's results as the dashed lines. You can see where we were last year. So overall, there is a decline in people's confidence in personal safety when travelling by bus, and that is more extreme between the two genders. I thought that was worth raising. I put a link to the slides at the beginning of this pack. There's a link in the report. Everything here is published online. If there's any questions, please do either raise them now or afterwards, if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you, Dave. So we've got operators here today, which is great. Thank you very much indeed for coming. I thought we'd do rail first and then buses, if that's okay. And obviously, I know for all of us, we get a lot of comments from residents and businesses, so there'll be lots of questions for you, I'm sure. If we can try and keep our questions short and answers to the point, that'd be really helpful, because we've got probably quite a lot to go through. So with that advice, shall we start? So we've got, from the rail point of view, we've got Kerry Peters here from Northern, Darren Alsop from Northern. Please wave. Thank you. We've got Melissa Farmer from Transparent Express and George Thomas from Transparent Express. Please wave. Thank you very much. So questions, comments for those. I've got Councillor Hutchinson, I've got Councillor Morley, I've got Councillor Bolt, Buckley and McLaughlin. Thank you.
I would really like to thank the Chair and Mayor Brabin for the strength of representation they made as part to the Secretary of State for Transport regarding the ticket office closure proposals. So thank you very much for that, and for the proposal to seek legal means to challenge the consultation and the proposals. But I was really wanting to ask about the removal of the Nova 3 fleet for what seems to be an indeterminate period of time, as far as I can tell. So I was wondering whether there was any, I can understand that might be necessary in a very short term, but what is passenger satisfaction with the Nova 3 compared to the other trains that you're having, that you're running? Because it does seem as if the most popular rolling stock is actually being put into mothballs.
Thank you, Councillor Hutchinson. So we'll go through all the ones that I asked before you bring back to answer. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chair. When it comes down to page 15, 2.25, shorter trains, the short train from Leeds to Doncaster, where we're losing a carriage on that. It's one of the things that I do get a tremendous amount of complaints about, especially at the station at Outwood, that people can't actually get on that service. They're constantly waiting for another service to come. Obviously, that's overcrowded as well. How are you going to monitor that? And also, who's benefiting from our loss?
Thank you, Councillor Bolt.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. One of my frequent complaints on here that when we're doing rail issues, I realise that reports are often drafted at least centric. Can we have consideration of the other 4 local authorities, because Grand Central doesn't feature in the rail timetables, which does serve the other 4 authorities but not Leeds, and obviously is a key service linking not only our communities with Doncaster and London, but with each other on routes not covered. It'd be lucky to see that. Also, on rail issues, Chair, Transpennine route upgrade is mentioned, and it talks about in 2.49 about mitigation in Leeds. Can we also push, as an authority, for Network Rail to ensure that when they are doing works elsewhere, and in particular I've seen some of the dissatisfactory services that they're doing in Kirklees, when they're severing active travel corridors without putting in place adequate communications, adequate and equal route diversions. They've got enough money in the programme to make sure that active travel is catered for, and that's something which will come up later in the reports. I think the officer mentioned slight drop in figures. The media and the report actually says significant drop in figures in some cases with active travel. So when Network Rail are severing routes for long periods, meaning that people can't make those journeys, then it is going to impact on our active travel ambitions.
Thank you, Councillor Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask about the patronage levels, because we have here Northern 83%, Transpennine 75%, LNER 85%, Cross Country 70%, and all these figures are really low compared to 2019. And any business will tell you that the final 10% is where you get all your profit, obviously. And in addition to that, on page 23, 258, the proportion travelling by public transport has fallen considerably in this period. And I just wonder whether that can be addressed, please.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, 3 brief points. The first is on the emergency timetable that Transpennine Express are putting forward. The argument presented to us is that we'll have to put this significantly reduced service, but we can make it reliable. We've heard that before from all operators several times before, so my question is what's going to be different this time that will actually make that promise a reality? Yes, that was TP, sorry. Just on the way the data is presented in the report, I'm sure the figures for cancellations and P-coding have been presented to us before in table or graph form in the appendix. And I think I would like to see that. It's not in this report for some reason. And I'd like to see a return of that, because it does make the data easy to understand and it puts it in its longer historical context. We can only go back 1 survey in this report. And finally, on the ticket office closure consultation, grossly inadequate though it was, 600,000 responses is a heck of a lot. And can we have some commitment from the operators that they will actually listen to what was said and change their policy as a result?
Councillor First, you just indicated that quickly.
Madam Chair, there's lots of good questions being asked of operators, but I'd just like to mention what Matthew, and our colleague from Calderdale, has said earlier. I'd like to thank the Mayor for what she's doing, but at the end of the day, it's not the operators that are making these decisions. It's the government that's making the decision about closing out these ticket offices, and I hope they do listen to the people. It will be a minor miracle if they do, but I do hope they listen. I can only give an example of Dewsbury Station. Dewsbury Station celebrated its 175th year only a few weeks ago. It's had a ticket office for 175 years, through 2 world wars, and run very successfully. Over the years, it's changed with the with the staff. But nevertheless, a ticket office has been opened. And now, thanks to this government, I think we perhaps, just perhaps, there is a glimmer of light. I think even some Conservative MPs have come out and saying this is an absolute nonsense. So I hope they're listened to, and I hope that our voice and the people's voice has been listened to. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Firth. I think probably everyone around this table would agree with you. Obviously, it's something we discussed at the last meeting, and I think we were unanimous, actually, in writing the letter to express our deep concern at the proposed closures. So, I'm going to come to Simon first, just to go to Councillor Bolt's queries about Grant Central, active travel mitigations, etc., and then I'll go to the operator for the questions answered.
Certainly, thank you. So, apologies, you're quite right, Councillor. We should be including all rail services in the report, and we'll certainly ensure that we do that going forwards. Grand Central is a real step forward in terms of connectivity within the conurbation, but we need to make sure that it's operated as effectively as possible. The issues in terms of impact on active travel routes is something that we'll take away and raise with Network Rail management, and look to bring some advice back to you in terms of their response in that regard.
Well spotted, Councillor Belt, thank you very much. Shall I go to a lot of those are TPE? I think the Nova Trains ones, I don't know whether Melissa or George want to address that, but we are concerned about Nova Trains going and never getting them back, and then having very short carriages, etc.
Right, yeah, and I'll do my best. I suppose there's quite a few questions there which touched on the question of demand. So I think quite rightly, at the moment we're at a lower base than we were before COVID. I think everyone's aware of that. Getting that right is absolutely dependent on getting to a stable position with the timetable customers can rely on, and we definitely recognise that's not something that we've been providing to date. So in order to get us out of that scenario, we need to simplify the business, and that means taking some sort of challenging decisions around the rolling stock mix to make sure that's much more reliable, and some challenging decisions around the timetable as well in the short term. So to the question of sort of how can we be confident that that's going to do the trick this time, that's very much been carefully designed. So we have enough capacity within our resource base to undertake the training that we need to complete in order to run a reliable timetable. So we've gone through those plans in quite a significant degree of detail, and the new leadership from DOHL has been through that with a fine tooth comb. So the simplification of the fleet, as I say, is a key part of that, and that's part of the driver for moving away from the Nova 3 fleets. And I think as Chris Jackson, who's the new managing director, confirmed at the Rail North committee last week, those trains are on as a result of the lower patronage. They're not loading as heavily as they were before COVID. So that's between 50 and 60% at the moment, and the removal of those trains represents a relatively small reduction in the overall size of the fleet. So we have looked at this really quite carefully to make sure that that's aligning to where demand's going to go in the future, and that does not see those numbers increase significantly. That said, if we can get to a position where we are delivering growth and we're moving towards the Transpennine route upgrade investment, that we are working closely with DfT on the opportunities to provide new trains which will be able to take advantage of the new wires which you can see being invested in across the north of England. So our ambition is really that this is the first step in trying to regrow TPE, get the basics right, make sure the timetable is steady and reliable, and we can make the case for that future investment. So hopefully that goes some way to answering the questions, but happy to take some more if that's helpful.
I think just on that matter, I think what a lot of us would say is a train in the hand is worth two in the bush, to be quite honest. So you're talking about buying more trains for the future, but we've already got a train that works, so we're very worried about letting it go. whilst we don't have any guarantee of additional trains being there for when this period of recovery is over. So I think I would like, and I'll be writing obviously to Chris Jackson as well, just to say I'd like to see workings out. As you said, the grid or the net, what do they call that thing they talk about? It's not a grid, is it? The system or whatever they call it.
Route diagrams.
Route diagrams, that's the word I was looking for. The route diagrams, would like to see how those work, just to make sure that we can check the capacity and make sure it fits with the growth that we anticipate. Obviously, not in the north, we've gone back to the trains in more heavily than other parts of the country, and just want to make sure that DfT aren't just assuming we're like the south, but because we have got quite a lot of demand up here, and latent demand probably that needs to be caught back up because people have just not been using trains because they've been unreliable. So we're expecting that to come back with abandon. What else do we have on that list? So is worried about what's new in this plan that's not been new before. I suppose that's another question. Why is this plan going to work when the others didn't?
So the primary challenge we've faced is around being able to get through the driver training backlog that we accumulated through COVID. So we've clearly not been able to do that based on the current timetable. So the objective is to provide a timetable which has capacity to run the trains to train the drivers on, and have enough drivers to be on those training programs. So then we're able to step the timetable back up reliably. Is the plan. So that is a slightly different approach to what we've seen before. So I think I would challenge the characterisation of that as an emergency. So it's not. This isn't a quick reaction to try and stabilise something. This is a carefully thought out plan to provide that training and give us a stable basis on which to reintroduce service frequency.
Excuse me, can I just add into that we did have the issue of lack of rest day working for 18 months, so that again was impacting our services, which meant when we did reduce services previously, it was also in response to not having rest day working or overtime. Now that has since, the ban on overtime has since been suspended. That was back in June that we got that back. So with having rest day working back, it has enabled us to dramatically reduce our P-coding, which was also mentioned by yourself. And so we have seen the immediate impact of that since that rest day working did come back into play. Now, where you see an increase in P-codes, again, or the cancellations the night before, is actually where it's the national action short of a strike, which is, again, the action short of a strike is lack of rest day working. So where you see a sudden increase in P-codes, it's because of the national action, but we have had rest day working back at TP, which has enabled us to reduce the number of day before cancellations. So just going back to the original question of when we reduced services previously, we also didn't have rest day working, whereas this time, as that, if it continues to be the ban suspended, we will have both slight reduction in services, but we will have rest day working available, which means we should still be able to run those services reliably.
So just a question about P coding, why it's not in the document. Is that us or is that the operators? I don't know where P coding normally comes from.
We do have a document which includes the details on the P coding. I didn't include it on the basis of the length of the document to start with, but we can supply that information if so required.
Yes, please. Let's include that for future. It is something that the Mayor has actually held to account on quite strongly, isn't it? Ticket officers as well. I mean, there were 680,000 responses. I know that probably affects Northern more than anybody else. Does it really? That's mainly your stations that are affected. Do you have any comments to make about 680,000 responses? Is quite huge, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's been a significant amount of feedback which has gone through to Transport Focus. So, as you know, we're all still in a consultation period, and so we're allowing Transport Focus time to be able to read through all the feedback that they've received and ask us of any questions that they've got based around that feedback, and we're in the period of responding to that accordingly, as and when those questions come up. My understanding is that the period of time for Transport Focus to close that down is the end of October and not the 6th now. So I'll check on that information, but I think it's been extended for a few weeks because of the volume of feedback that's come through to enable a meaningful consultation to take place. so that they can make sure that they look over all those points that have been raised.
So I think Councillor Firth was clear that he sees this as something that, because government are taking the money out, this is what you're having to do, and I think we are firmly putting it at government's door in this respect. However, just a little bit concerned about the delay in the decision, actually, because I know from the question that we had at Rail North, it sounded like the operators were starting to hold back vacancies pending this change, and that is going to mean that you've got a very fragile ticket office network. Somebody's sick, you might be closing them more frequently, for example. So I'd like some assurance that we're not going to see any closures of ticket offices before government change their mind on this budget pressure.
So you're absolutely right. There have been some vacancies which have been held until we see the broader picture on where we're left with. People want to be able to enable the people who are remaining in our industry the opportunity to be able to have bumping opportunities to move into other roles if that's what the consultation comes out with. We're still moving people around to be able to cover vacancies, so if there's sickness or annual leave on the day, we will move people around accordingly. We have seen some ticket offices closing, whether it be an AM shift or a PM shift, but that's not our intention. Our intention is to absolutely keep those ticket offices open as and when we can.
Thank you. Also, we don't want a decision by stealth. Councillor Firth?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions. How long does it take to train a driver? And because we've had this debate about driver shortages for a long time now, and it seems to go on and on and on. And can I just make a comment which really puzzles me? And I know you mentioned rest day working. For a massive industry like rail, to depend on rest day working is actually a nonsense when you work it out. You employ lots and lots of people, and they've got a working week. Why do you depend on them to give up the rest days to continue travelling trains? It's absolute nonsense to me.
Thank you. Darren, would you like to, or Kerry, I'm just giving you a chance to respond. I'm not sure which of you does which, so sorry.
I mean, thankfully, Chair, not unusual in the questions, and I think driver training takes approximately 2 years. What we've seen is more attrition to other operators, mainly freight, within Northern. It's 15 months is a full training programme for a driver at Northern, roughly, to get them from a trainee to a qualified driver. Our notice period for a driver is 6 months. So when Great British Rail Freight, etc., are taking on new drivers, they obviously come to the operators for trained drivers. The 6 months notice period is great, but as you can see, the deficit and the difference of a year and a half doesn't allow for that attrition to be really put into what's called our NRP, Northern Resource Plan. So it's very difficult to plan in advance of what other operators or other freight operators especially are doing. The increase in freight traffic has seen a substantial driver resource need for the freight companies, and they do not often train their own drivers. They come to operators and take our drivers. So we're roughly 15 months to train a driver. Half of that we lose because of the notice period. Northern currently don't have a rest day working agreement, but there's no doubt, I'm sure TP colleagues will articulate, it's very helpful when you've got a training backlog to have that ability for your people to work additional days to aid with training.
Thank you. TPA, did you want to, George or Melissa?
So I guess the main point to make, we've already spoken about the importance of getting the timetable and the resource plans aligned, so we are able to clear that training backlog. So that's very much what we're trying to do, is reduce the amount of strain that we're placing on the workforce to work that overtime. As my colleague says, it is very helpful if you can have that flexibility, particularly when you're trying to clear the sort of backlog that we're trying to manage. But the objective, as I said earlier, is to really fix that this time and make sure that we've got a manageable trajectory going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Hutchison, I think we're done for on rail then.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, with the infrastructure work that's going on, there's an increased need for replacement bus services to be provided. I have had complaints from disabled residents that the replacement buses are not always wheelchair accessible. Is there a requirement on the operators to make sure that replacement bus services do allow passengers who depend on wheelchairs to actually make use of those replacements?
Very good question. Transpennine, is that something, or Northern?
Yes, so I think it'd be useful to hear about those specific cases, and we'll look into those and make sure those are addressed.
So you're saying they should actually be wheelchair accessible, should?
Yeah, well, there should be
buses?
some provision, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's make sure that is a commitment. If there's any services that is happening on regularly, Councillor Hutchinson, can you let us know? Because that sounds like something that shouldn't happen. Sorry, I had Councillor Edwards and I missed him, sorry.
Thank you. It's a follow-up question for both of the train operators. How would you characterise industrial relations with the unions at the moment from your point of view? And can you indicate what channels you have open from your point of view, from your end, and also the frequency of meetings with union representatives and staff representatives?
I'm happy to take that question if you wish, Chair. The Rail Delivery Group are leading negotiations with the rail industry. That's the RMT Trade Union and ASLEF Drivers Union. The train operators are not actually sat around the table with the trade unions to negotiate a pay deal. As I say, that's been done centrally by the Rail Delivery Group, and we'll wait further information and updates on that. Disappointingly, you've all seen that 2 more dates have been announced by ASLEF, the Train Drivers Union, for strike action. And again, we know that's going to adversely affect our customers, and the quicker we get a resolve for everybody, the better, and I'm sure we'd all agree.
Sarah Spanner, did you want to ask that question as well?
I think only to say that we meet very regularly on a local level, as I'm sure Northern will do as well. And there's an extent to which, as we say, that there's national conversations are going on, but we're really working really hard with our local representatives to make sure we're focusing on the issues that we can control specifically around the training backlog and all of the other issues that I've described.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor. Thank you for the responses. I mean, I would say that obviously we're very keen for people to use trains more frequently. Very keen for to get traffic off the roads and to have an efficient service. And of course, the only way to get people back using the train and the buses, which we'll come on to next, of course, is to have regular services that turn up and that go to places where people want to go. And it sounds very basic, but it is fundamentally what we need. And I'd just encourage you, I know you're in the weeds of it all the time, and I know it is very difficult times for all passenger and transport operators, but just think about the connectivity of your services in terms of levelling up agenda, connecting with disadvantaged groups. We talked at Rail North last week about priorities for public transport and the need for it not just think about going from A to B, but actually connecting disadvantaged people to places with opportunity for jobs, etc., and leisure opportunities. It is very much a service which primes our economy, but also provides a social, leisure and health service, if you like, across the whole of the north of England. And we're very keen to make sure all those points are covered when you're looking at business planning in the future. So think about levelling up, I would say, more frequently, because some of the services that start to be changed and cut back do divide communities, and it's very detrimental in the long run. So with that then, Councillor Morley, very briefly, because I need to move on to our very patient bus colleagues who've been waiting to be grilled.
So was your question regarding the Leeds Doncaster?
Yeah.
Do you want me to take that, Seb, Kerry?
Take it. So I think we are confident that the services between Doncaster and Leeds, 95% of them will be absolutely no problem. We do acknowledge what you mentioned about the outward services. So the 728 Doncaster to Leeds is a risk service for us. So as a result of that, the Nottingley Street House Leeds services in the morning peak will be extended to 4-car and will include an additional call at Outwood for that reason, to try and mitigate. And what we commit to do is to make sure that we continue to monitor those train services as and when they come in as well. I think there was a question earlier about profit and what we do with the profit. I think we need to make it clear that Northern are heavily subsidised. We don't make profit on any of our services, so actually any money saved go back to the taxpayer and reduce the amount of subsidy that the taxpayers pay towards us. So it's not a for-profit, it's about reducing cost.
Which goes back to the business planning point I made, that actually as a public service there is a service that you need to provide for all communities, and just because it might not fit on the map or all go to London, obviously you don't go to London, but you know, to the main cities, it doesn't really help everybody in West Yorkshire, so we need to be mindful of all communities going forward, and it's a good point raised there, Councillor Morley, about that service. Right, let's move on to buses. Obviously we've got colleagues here from Arriva and we've got colleagues here from First. Have we got Transdev here now? I'm not seeing them on the list. Where's Transdev gone? I saw them recently, but anyway. So questions for First and for Arriva. Can I see hands raised, please? Councillor Hannan first.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I also thank Dave for putting the passenger experience together? It's really interesting to see that there is some good news and some bad news. I want to bring the attention to the satisfaction level of the buses, especially around Leeds, where it's 5.9 from 10, which is very low, and it's lowest this year. A question for First is, can you tell us about the current vacancy positions in your both depots, and is that contributing towards the punctuality and the cancellation of buses in Leeds? Thank you.
I can see anybody else wanted to indicate in this draft question, so shall we go straight to the answer? Kaylee, I think you're on.
That's me, I'm up. Thank you. So my colleague Tom Bridge was due to be here with me today, who's the Operations Director, so I will take the question away and get you a firmer answer, but what I can share with you is that we have really stabilised regards our driver position, and that's across our region, not just in the Leeds arena. So since April we've had a net gain of 75 drivers, which has drastically improved the position, and we're working on several driver retention and attraction projects, some of which is around our driver duties and shifts, which is the biggest point of feedback that we get from our drivers. And in terms of our attraction strategy, there's work going in to look at more flexible patterns, which is to enable us to attract a different type of driver perhaps than those that we've been able to attract previously, you know, those that may not be able to flex their week on week to come and work for us at First Bus. So we are doing a lot of work. We've made some really positive progress. In terms of the contribution of that driver position to punctuality and reliability, so I was reading through the report and pleased to say that in the last few months in particular, I know that the report only covers up until June. The last two periods of our report in particular sees a good improvement within punctuality and reliability. So our lost mileage position is extremely low. Our lost mileage regards to driver absenteeism is extremely low. And so we have made some real headways with that. And continue to do so. That's not to say that it doesn't remain a priority for us. Just recently, on the 3rd of September, we actually implemented our first real positive service change in a short while on the back of changes that were needed to the network. And what we've done is put a wholly, and when I say a wholly positive service change in, that's addressing punctuality as a challenge across our network, focusing within the Leeds areas in particular. And in the last 2 weeks since that's been implemented, across some of those routes, we've seen a between 10 and 15% improvement in punctuality. So a real drastic improvement where we've been able to lend the resource and the time and the software technology to those routes, given it the time that it's been due now that we're through the challenges that the pandemic and the DFT funding position presented us, and really pleasing to be able to put our efforts into punctuality and real stabilisation in that respect, rather than looking at withdrawals and changes, which is not something that we want to do.
Thank you, Kelly. So I was reflecting on earlier actually that, you know, are we able to say now then there's going to be no more cuts to bus services? Because that would be really helpful if we can say that. Because what we'd like to get to now is growing networks, increasing patronage, and not having to figure out how to, you know, amend routes to keep people served. So if we can all agrees with no new cuts to bus services, that would be super. Can First and Arriva agree to that?
I can't comment on Arriva, I can pass to Kim in a second, so she's got more time to consider her answer here. What I would say is that it's not in our interest to cut and change services. We know that it's a huge point of feedback, and it's not something that we want to do. It doesn't support us with growing patronage, which is the first key goal for any bus operator. So we are absolutely working towards getting to the position that you mentioned, Chair, and so bear with us, please, whilst we get there. We're working in really close collaboration with combined authority colleagues, and I think we've made real headway with the collaborative efforts in the last 6 to 12 months in particular in planning for service changes, ensuring that we're listening to the district leaders on the asks of constituents and trying to respond to those as best we can, whilst bearing in mind that the sustainability of the network relies in some respects on profitable services.
Thank you, Kelly. Kim?
Yeah, and I share the sentiment. You know, we actively are trying to grow the market, trying to make our network bigger again, which is a really pleasing place to finally have got to. We do still have a couple of routes of concern, but I'm very optimistic that with the colleagues at the Combined Authority we'll be able to find solutions to those. And as I say, we are looking to grow. But looking to the future, I think we need to be careful not to forget that the network is also heavily reliant on the funding that we currently receive and on concessionary reimbursement. And they're probably two unknowns of the future. We're hopeful that there'll be good outcomes to them and that no further cuts would be needed. And that's certainly our ambition.
So I'll take that as a yes, there's going to be no new cuts then. Or no, there's going to be no new cuts. Councillor Edwards. Councillor Edwards smiled at me nicely before you put your hand up, so I thought that was Councillor Edwards indicating, but perhaps it wasn't.
So I should smile. A question for First, if I can. Given that some services have been cancelled in Leeds, like the 48, for example, what improvement in patronage would be necessary to reinstate the service?
Wow, I would need to do some quick maths to answer that question. Specifically, I would need to take that one away for sure. I mean, at a route level, we would need to assess a lot of factors to answer that question. So if it's possible for me to take that away and come back to you personally, then I'll do that. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you very much. This is a question primarily for First, because Arriva aren't over on the northwestern side of Leeds, but there are issues that affect both companies. So looking at the customer satisfaction levels, we can see for buses, a score of 5.9 out of 10, whereas over the page, 2.55, the national survey suggests that 83% of passengers were satisfied, according to the Transport Focus survey. So there's a significant gap between those two. So when it comes to customer service experience, both residents and also fellow colleagues, fellow council colleagues, when they have contacted First and Transdev, who unfortunately are not here, but they're equally culpable. When they've contacted them, very often people are dissatisfied with the customer service received. That can include complaints not being answered adequately or simply not being answered. And I've heard that from residents as well as from fellow councillors. And one of the big issues we have is that there's no, we don't know what the best and worst performing routes are. And that would be very helpful for us to know, and particularly on those in those areas in my ward and other wards where First are the only operator, and the operators cite commercial sensitivity. But what commercial sensitivity is there if you've got a monopoly and you're receiving significant amounts of public funds? It's simply not acceptable to many residents and many of our colleagues. So can we have an idea of the best and worst performing routes, because that also increases accountability for our residents and for us as well. Can we have some proper data on cancellations, punctuality? That's particularly an issue in areas on the edges of cities such as mine. So that's the first part of my question about customer service and accountability. The other issue as well, when it comes to a lot of outer areas, is about the length of routes, and I imagine this would affect Arriva as well. Certainly in Leeds, many of the routes are extremely long, and so, for example, out to Northwest, you have buses going from Otley all the way to the city centre. The likelihood of there being delays is significant, especially where there are well-known areas of congestion, and this was something that was identified in the report as well in terms of affecting reliability. Congestion. Now, I accept that there are factors outside of the bus operator's control. However, one of the things a lot of local representatives have been saying is that we would like to have shorter routes within local areas. If you are in inner Leeds or inner Bradford, there are more bus routes available and there are more options available, but in a lot of outer areas there is one company that operates that route, and so our areas are disproportionately affected, and one of the obvious ways that could be reduced is by having more local routes and by responding to that aspect instead of insisting on this one size fits all long distance route, which is bound to be subject to delays.
Kaylee? That was
Thank
part
you.
one and part two there.
There was.
Brief answer if you can, so
Yeah,
just
no
conscious we've got
problem at
lots
all.
to get through on the agenda.
So first starting with a recognition of the point raised around the contact centre and customer complaints. So I'm frankly surprised to hear that there's problems with that, but only because I've actually recently seen data that shows that we're getting back to customers much quicker than we were previously. Everything is relative, of course, and that we have made some real drastic improvements in terms of staffing levels and then the resulting responses that are provided. So I'd be interested to dig into that a little bit more for you, if that's okay. In terms of accountability, I don't have any qualms with providing detail to you on the best and worst performing routes and having a really open conversation around why, if there is the monopoly that you describe, why we do struggle to look after some routes despite that. Ultimately, some of those routes will perform better than others, some of those routes will have more patronage than others, some of them will experience their own challenges by way of punctuality, reliability, etc., etc. So perhaps there's benefit in a conversation specifically between us if you've got challenges that we can run through. In terms of the shorter routes within your areas and versus the long distance routes, it's absolutely something that we can look to take into account within our network reviews. What I am really conscious of is making decisions that may benefit some passengers and be a detriment to others, and I've not actually had that point of feedback raised to me prior to now, and so I'm conscious to take it on board and grateful for it, and I'll feed it back to my network team who'll take it into account. Thank you.
So I've got Councillor Firth, Councillor Hutchison, Councillor Slam.
Thank you, Chair. I shall be brief. My question is about 2.56 on this, about disabled and elderly and not coming back to bus. Have you a plan to try and encourage this group to come back onto bus?
Thank you. Sorry, just quickly on the previous question, that it should be noted the Transport Focus survey is very different to the one done in West Yorkshire. And I've just checked and they actually haven't released the regional results yet, but they do give us a regional result on those surveys. And typically West Yorkshire's at the higher end of the satisfaction on the Transport Focus surveys. So please don't look at them as a direct comparison because they're very different in their nature. In terms of concessionary travel, there's been a lot of research done into this, and Transport Focus in particular have done a lot of research. And typically what we're finding is that most concessionary passengers are travelling again, so that fear has predominantly gone. There's a small portion that is still fearful from the COVID impact, but the majority of the reduction is actually that concessionary pass holders are travelling less often, and there's a number of reasons for that. So, for example, that a lot of concessionary pass holders are now more comfortable with doing online shopping that they weren't comfortable doing pre-pandemic. So we're doing lots of kind of campaigns and activities, both individually as operators, but also nationally. And the government are actually doing a campaign to try and get concessionary pass holders back onto bus. But there is no kind of magic silver bullet for this. We just need to improve reliability, improve punctuality, try to get more people back as quickly as we can.
So I need to go through the questions first, because otherwise we've got to get to other items. So Councillor Hutchinson, Councillor Slam, Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you. I concur entirely with what Councillor Edwards has said about reliability being such a key factor, not just in Guidesley but in Calderdale as well. And again, it's largely a monopoly service in most of those routes. So where the report says that we're looking at a detailed analysis of the results of performance by area, it really does need to be by route rather than by area, because otherwise we can't match it up to what our residents are telling us, particularly on services that run just once an hour. If a bus doesn't turn up at all, then that's a 2-hour wait, which really scuppers your chance of building any increased patronage. I would like to also say how disappointed I am that North Halifax, the large deprived communities in Ovenden, Illingworth, seem to have been heavily targeted for cuts to service frequency. For Ovenden and Illingworth, the last bus Monday to Friday now leaves at 10:15 in the evening. A lot of these people work in the care sector, in the health sector, and in the evening economy. You're essentially and have no alternative way of getting back home. So you're asking them to pay 2 or 3 hours of their wages just to be able to get a return from work. Including that, the weekly Red Arrow ticket you've increased from £11 to £22, so doubling the cost to regular travellers. So I really would plead that those communities are better served by bus, because for a lot of them they're not car owners. It's vital for them.
Councillor Slam.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I've always said that reliability, punctuality and affordability are the three key, themes that people look for when they're actually travelling on trains or buses. And buses mostly, because punctuality is very, very important to them, because if we are on a half-hourly service and one misses, you're there for an hour. And if you've got appointment or if you've got to get to work, then you're in trouble. But with buses having so much scrutiny now, with the CCTV, on first buses, there are about 11 cameras now. Why are people still not feeling safe on buses? Is there something that we're missing, where we're not working with other service providers or authorities that can actually, do something about this? Because a driver is a lone worker. He or she cannot defend everything that goes on that bus. If there's something happening on upper deck, drivers are very hesitant to go upstairs because they've got to gather everything, they've got to get all their personal stuff, their money, everything. So therefore, but I think the operators need to actually do something better than what they've been doing over the last decade, because if people are not feeling confident on the buses, then there is a real problem. They're never ever going to come back to buses. But one thing I can't understand is in 2.75, the last bullet point saying promoting bus services. I don't know how we promote bus services, because every single road that you go on, there is a bus running on it. Whether it's Arriva, whether it's Transdev, whether it's First. So I'm not really sure how we are promoting. So is there an example from the operators how they are promoting their services to the local communities, whether it's schools, whether it's faith groups, or whether it's whoever it is, that they are actually, what campaigns have we run to promote buses, to bring people back on the buses?
Because if we, I have seen a lot more people coming on with the £2 fare, which is good. I've seen a lot of young people now using the £2.50 fare. So we've seen increase in patronage on that side of it. But it's really the senior citizens that are actually who, you came 9:30 or 9:25, you came to a bus stop and it was heaving with people getting on with the senior citizens pass. Now, that's not happening. So there is, I mean, I don't believe that everybody's shopping online. I think there is a perception that the buses are not safe anymore, and that's why people are trying to stay away from it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Salam. Of course, in the BSIP, we do have some money for transport police, don't we?
Yes.
To make sure we have more transport police on public transport in West Yorkshire, which is great. So, Councillor McLaughlin, then I've got Khan and Patience, so can we please keep it?
Thank you, Chair. Follow that. Councillor Salam has rather stolen the point I was going to make about safety. We've just had a very informative presentation that says everybody feels less safe and some people significantly less safe in the space of just a year. And I was going, what are your plans to address that? And can I suggest that there is a connection there with the cuts to frequency and the below industry standard reliability and punctuality? Because the longer you're stood at a bus stop on your own, particularly at night, particularly if it's bad weather, the less safe you're going to feel. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Khan.
Just in particular, I think concerns Arriva. Has the operators considered using SIL money, community infrastructure money, to cover some of the remote and smaller routes, particularly impacting rural communities?
That's community infrastructure levy, yeah, absolutely. Which I think has happened in certain parts. Councillor Patient.
Thank you, Chair.
I bet that's the first time you've
I
ever
know,
heard that.
don't move on. Don't embarrass me now. I mean, thank you, and some of what I wanted to ask has been covered. I just wonder, and it's always great that we have tackling the climate emergency implications on this, and it'd be remiss for me to not do a read across, as I sit on the climate, energy, and environment one. I'm just wondering what your commitments are there, because it's great that you're running campaigns to bring people back on the buses, but what are you saying actually in terms of your ambition around sustainability and getting, and we all know the investment that's happening, and we've seen the B Network announcements over in Greater Manchester, and that's brilliant. But I just want to know that your ambition outstrips what the government are telling us to do, because I think that level of commitment, we can't just wait for things to happen. We need to actually start tackling them now. So just very interested in the benefit of read across about what you guys are doing.
Right. Can you respond to all those in a brief but succinct and direct fashion? Thank you.
I'll pick up the decarb one just because it's just been asked, and then we can move on to the other topics. I was noting them as I went. In terms of decarbonisation, you may be aware First Bus has made a commitment to decarbonise its fleet entirely by 2035. Just in the last month, we have submitted an alternative proposal to the franchising bus reform proposal that is underway, and within that proposal, First Bus commit to accelerate its programme within West Yorkshire for decarbonisation to bring that forward to 2030, with a commitment to take all of the non-Euro 6 vehicles out of its fleet in Yorkshire West and replace those actually within the next 24 months that beyond that decision, so beyond next spring. So in the case that an alternative to franchising were to be considered, those would be the commitments made regarding the West Yorkshire fleet, which I believe is really brilliant news for the citizens of West Yorkshire if we do move in that direction. I can't comment on decarbonisation for Arriva, so I'll let Kim do that.
Thanks, Kaylee. So clearly we've been working in partnership to deliver that alternative proposal, so there's full details within there. We're already committed to 47 electric buses that we plan to bring into Wakefield, and we're currently going through the planning application for that. And we also support the ambition to be the ambitions in the bus service improvement plan to get up to net zero by 2036. So we're working very hard to do that. Wakefield is our biggest project that we're currently working on to get underway. No. Do you want me to pick up?
I'll jump in on the marketing one. There was a question as to what operators are doing to promote bus. I'm saddened that you asked, because there's absolutely loads going on in this area to promote bus. So we, as First Bus, have just finished our Catch the Summer campaign, unfortunately in the wettest summer I think we've had for a long time, so maybe people didn't feel that they were able to catch the summer. But there was a lot of advertising and promotion activity ongoing across West Yorkshire. We are taking the concessionary challenge that we all share around usership into our own hands, and we are rolling out a concessions campaign. So you'll see that at the end of September into October. And we've been doing a lot of work actually with combined authority colleagues on the processes that sit behind the application for concessionary pass holders, and then how we ensure that those renewals are valid and complete and quick. So that if concessionary pass holders run out in terms of their pass, that they can get back on to the services as soon as possible. So we're asking for some combined authority support to help us with this concessionary campaign and the processes around pass holders that we believe need some attention. In terms of recent marketing activity, just as you asked, there is leaflets going out around service changes that happened on the 3rd of September, which is advertising the really fantastic improvements that we've put into the X6 and 72 routes, adding earlier starts, later finishes and more punctual services. And so those are door drop type leaflets, and then every service change we push out materials across our website, across our app, etc. So always looking for opportunities in terms of marketing and advertising, so feel free to let me know if you think we're lacking in any of your areas. Kim, do you want to touch on marketing?
Yeah, just an important point, similar to First, and I'll not go into the details, but we've got quite a lot of schemes that we're promoting at the moment. But I think also it's important to note that with the combined authority, through the multi-ticketing company that we've got, we are doing a joint promotion on a specific corridor that all operators are participating in, and we're using it to measure the success of that campaign, so we can understand what works and what doesn't on a collaborative basis. So it's First, Arriva and Transdev are all participating in that alongside Metro, and we do all collectively as operators invest money via Metro in order to advertise the ticketing options that are available via there.
Good old-fashioned direct marketing, excellent. Let's hope that bears some fruit. So obviously you've heard how much people across the district and across the region are very invested in the bus services, and we want them to improve as fast as possible. I think Sir Councillor Carlisle, actually, for all the work he's done with operators to get to a stage where I'm hoping now we're in a steady state. And I heard you say in my own ears that you're not going to do any more cuts. But what we want to do now is build on that service and make sure that we provide people with the opportunities to use buses, get to work, get social opportunities. So your cooperation in doing that over the next few months will be very much appreciated. Thank you very much. So we're moving on now to agenda item 6, which is mass transit vision adoption. Yes, Luke. And I'm hoping you can be visionary in a short space of time.
Yeah, very short.
Thank you.
I won't speak to this at all. I'll just move. Hang on, sorry.
Yeah, go.
Right. Oh yeah. So I won't talk to this document. It's a pretty well known. I'm sure many of you will have read it a number of times. Actually, it is, of course, the statement by which the combined authority sets out its intentions and aspirations for the future of mass transit in West Yorkshire. It has been very widely consulted on 3 times now, and I think it's an excellent document. It is, of course, a live document in the sense that as time develops and we find out more, it will develop itself into the future. But we would like to adopt this document as a supplementary planning guidance to the local transport plan. We understand that the correct way of doing that is to take that to the combined authority, and before we take it to the combined authority, we have to bring it here to the transport committee. So I move that the transport committee recommends, if it sees fit, the document to the combined authority for adoption of supplementary planning guidance.
So this is actually very exciting, mass transit. It is something that this region has been needing for decades, if not the last century. And in fact, we know that sometimes there was trams at some points in certain places, but then it all fell by the wayside like 100 years ago or something. So we are actually being change makers as a transport committee, as a combined authority, putting mass transit in place, and it is very exciting. And I would encourage you all to make sure the team are invited, working with your leaders, to get them to come and present to councillors so they know what's going on here, what the size of the prize is, and how it's going to be developed over the next few years. So it's really going to help our economy and make sure that socially excluded people who may not be on a transport link at the moment might actually get run through this at some point. So it's all very exciting stuff. So has anybody got any questions? I think we're all overwhelmed with the opportunities, really, Luke. Councillor Edwards and Councillor Patience, thank you.
Thank you very much for the work on this, and yes, it's a very comprehensive document, as the chair has said. I think some of the issues that, one of the challenges as I see it, so just looking at Bradford and North West Leeds and also North Leeds, it's some of the issues that we were discussing in the last section. So thinking about the bus services. So for example, it talks about a fixed link between Bradford and the airport. So currently we only have one bus company that operates on that route, and that bus company has in fact recently cut some of their services, both the ones within Leeds and the ones within Bradford, and at the moment they have a monopoly. So the idea of competition there doesn't feature, but I think that having those connections are really important, and we need to know that there's that reliability. Our communities need to know that those services are not going to be cut at the whim of an operator, and they need to know that they're going to be consistent, because at the moment that is one thing that is lacking. And so I think many of the points around reliability, consistency, stability are so important here, and also recognising where there are those obvious blockages, so particularly in North Leeds around congestion, which then contributes to public perceptions of slow and unreliable services. So I do welcome this, and I think there are many interesting ideas in here, many good ideas, which will bring different communities together. But we do also need to acknowledge the reality of where we are at the moment and just how far there is to go. Of course.
Councillor Patient.
Thank you, and it's really want to endorse it. Just a bit of clarity from my part. Supplementary planning guidance versus, so I'm going to go into my local plan head, supplementary planning documents. Oh, okay. How much of it is guidance and how much of it is actual direction?
I'm not a town planner, and I may have misspoken there. Unfortunately, my town planning colleague is at another meeting who prepared this, so it may be that I've used the wrong terminology. So forgive me if I have. We'll make sure that the right terminology is used, but it's supplementary to the transport plan, whether it's guidance or compulsion. I'm not entirely sure. I have to.
Thanks for the clarity. Yeah, thank you. So this stands as a sub-strategy to the local transport plan. The local transport plan is the statutory document that's produced at a West Yorkshire level on behalf of the 5 authorities and the combined authority. The critical element around a local transport plan is that if we want to go forward and secure central government funds for a policy, then that policy needs to be stated in the local transport plan, and the vision allows us to go down to the level of granularity that's needed to show that we've got that policy backing for funded submissions.
It's very important. So if it's a long-term infrastructure ambition, it does need to be in our local plans. There's no two ways about it. We've still got the Councillor Edwards questions to come back on, but I'll go to Councillor Firth and Councillor Cannon. Were you indicating?
Thank you very much, Chair. Going forward, I should be sure to invite you to come and speak to colleagues in Kirklees. But my second point is you touch on carbon emissions. And if we are going to be visionary, let's not just stick to electric. Let's consider hydrogen, because hydrogen going forward, the trains are running in certain parts of the world on hydrogen now, trams running on hydrogen. For the environment, it does away with stanchions and wires, and so it will be much easier to develop. But I thought I'd touch on that, Chair. I think dear to you.
I like that idea. Councillor Hannan?
Thank you very much, Chair. Luke, at this stage it looks like it's still a vision. I think, Simon, you mentioned that it's going to go to the next stage, which is the local transport action plans. Are you able to give us a bit of a timeline on that? Because a lot of the questions I'm getting is, when are we going to actually see spades in the ground? Thank you.
So before we, but Councillor Bolts wants to ask a question first, and I'll come back with answers. Councillor Bolt.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. And Chair, sorry. Just minded again the vision document. Again, and it's what Peter McBride and colleagues always used to say, that there's a lot of emphasis on east-west connectivity, but the connectivity from Huddersfield through Kirkburton, Denbydale, etc., is key as well. It's a key transport corridor, and will link. I know this is West Yorkshire mass transit, but we'll link to South Yorkshire, which is a big business area for those of us in Kirklees. Looking again at corridors, one of the corridor descriptions is South Leeds to Dewsbury. Well, how do people from North Kirklees access employment in Leeds? You know, we're not all running on the axis from South Leeds to Dewsbury. You know, there are people along the A62, A58, etc., who are on that corridor to get from Kirklees, which, when I was a cabinet member, we used to get big plans about the access corridors, and the Kirklees to Leeds was one of the busiest commuter corridors in the area. So let's look at all that. And they also talk about, all these slides talk about local cycle connections, enabling things, and active travel, as we've heard before, has suffered a drop to pre-pandemic levels. So when we were talking before about passenger usage, the cycle levels and active travel we're in, perhaps we could have some user satisfaction, so we know why, after all the investment in active travel, that we're seeing a drop in usage. We're seeing also, when it talks about Huddersfield to Dewsbury corridor, the railway stations of Deaton, Murfield and Ravensthorpe provide connectivity to Dewsbury and Huddersfield. I'm sure if Councillor Scullion was still on this committee when she used to wax lyrical about the benefits of Murfield railway station and its connectivity, she'd be able to tell you about its connectivity to the Calder Valley and beyond, to Lancashire. Indeed, Murfield accesses Doncaster, Wakefield and London. So, let's have the proper picture. Murfield is the only railway station in Kirklees with a direct service to London, and I'm sure Eric won't be forgetting that in his new role.
Thank you very much. Luke and Simon, or Simon, do you want to come in first, then Luke?
Shall I come in first, just on a couple of points? So, firstly, to address Councillor Hannan's point. So, as a combined authority and the five authorities, West Yorkshire has already taken a decision to bring forward a first priority group of corridors for development. We secured significant development funding through the first round of the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement, and under Luke's guidance, there is a programme that is now underway, which will be scheduled such that we are able to acquire all of the necessary consents from local authorities, consents from the community through a series of formal consultations, so that we are ready for the second round of the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement in 2027 to draw down funding to put spades in the ground. That's the path that we are on in terms of the priority groups. Just to address the broader point around the network, it's an incredibly important point, and one of the challenges of the vision document is that it takes a series of corridors and has a particular conversation about, if you like, principally plugging the gaps in the existing network that we have. Certainly, as we move forward and produce the new local transport plan in the new year, I want to be able to bring forward a plan which makes it very clear that we view our existing rail corridors in West Yorkshire as part of a mass transit system, and that a number of those corridors, as we've recently identified in the draft rail strategy, now need to be brought forward at a pace in terms of the improvements that are needed, like Calder Valley Line electrification, to take one example. We've made that very clear in the rail strategy. I do recognise that at the moment we've been having a conversation about plans for buses through the BSIP, plans for mass transit through this vision, and plans for rail through the rail strategy, to a degree in splendid isolation. Of course, that's not what we're looking to achieve. We're looking to achieve an integrated transport system, and that's the approach that we will look to set out for you over the next few months. So I think the point is really well made.
Thank you. And Luke, did you want to come back in this point?
No, I think
what about? Did you want to say anything about hydrogen, Luke?
It's lovely. We love hydrogen.
So we have had some presentations on hydrogen, and obviously Bradford's leading the way on hydrogen and very keen to see it used at all opportunities.
No smoking.
So I think just to add on the hydrogen point. So we clearly do want to be able to establish a system which it complies with the zero emission objectives of the conurbation. And we want to, at this stage, keep an open mind in terms of the technology. As we start to go forward and talk to the market around delivery aspects, at that point we will be looking for the market to come forward with options for us. And we do recognise that we have to look seriously at hydrogen as part of the fuel mix.
Thank you. So we're going on to another paper about mass transit. I think we're on this item. We're saying yes, we recommend this for adoption to the combined authority. Is my understanding. Are we happy to recommend this paper for adoption to the combined authority? I'm seeing nods around the room, so that's okay. So Luke, would you like to go on to the next about design and placemaking, which we've touched on a little bit already, actually,
Yes.
but.
That's the gap, as Simon put it very well. Sorry about that. And not just about, of course, they are about transport. That's their backbone, but they're also about helping to make the towns and cities they pass through better places. This idea of, you know, the improving the urban environment, improving equity outcomes, improving the communities that they go through. It's very much about trying to make the place better. Those of you who have visited the what we used to call the rest of Europe, and now we just call over there, will know that this is very commonly a part of these schemes. It hasn't been so much the case in Britain. We've tended to concentrate solely on the functional aspects, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but we have an opportunity here to leverage the change that will be engendered by these schemes to really make the best of town regeneration, place, you know, the public environment, helping to green up places. And in order to do that, we set out a series of kind of broad design criteria. Lots of pictures of trams in there, but it's not just about trams, it's also about other forms of largely electrified or possibly even hydrogen operated public transport, but zero emission public transport anyway. And seeing how we can work with the planning authorities, because as you know, the combined authority itself is not a planning authority, but our district partners to work in as much inward investment as possible outside the transport sphere to help improve the towns and cities. So that's really what the documents are about. They're not. We're not asking anyone to adopt them as under the transport planning system. This is very much about endorsing the documents, that they set out some good ideas and they should be at the backbone of our thinking going forward. That's really what it's all about. Yeah.
sounds like an eminently sensible proposition, because obviously the whole point about transport is not just about getting from A to B, it is about economic growth and making sure we have connectivity to places of opportunity. And we know that transport in Bradford, we're very much sort of placing our whole regeneration around transport and improved transport. So it is very much central to economic growth, and we want to promote that. So are we happy about the recommendations in the paper? That sounds sensible again. I'm seeing nods around the room. Yes, thank you very much, Luke and Simon, on that. So moving on then to the local electric vehicle infrastructure scheme. Melanie.
Thank you, Chair. So we have received funding from either Levi or Levy, however you want to say it. But basically, local electric vehicle infrastructure, which is government funded. We've received the first 2 rounds of funding. We've got £1.5 million for pilot funding and 1.3 million for capability funding. The process now is that we need to develop our business case for the 3rd element, which is the capital funding. So we are working with local authority partners and also Leeds University, who have been doing some research into this in terms of identifying precise sites for charge points within our local authority areas and considering both on-street and off-street charging options, but particularly on-street options in areas where it's actually very difficult for residents to put charging in, so they don't have off-street facilities. We're looking at implementing an estimated between 500 and 1,000 charge points that will be delivered through the capital scheme, and obviously the details of that will come out in the next round of business case development. And we're asking the committee to give approval for this final bid to be submitted as set out in the approach that's identified in the report.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions on this? Are we happy to give approval for the bid submission? Obviously we want to see more of this. Councillor Morley and Councillor Patient.
As much as I welcome it, I think it's a brilliant thing that we're doing. When I reflect on it and think of, properties that don't have drives or anything, I can look at the town I live in, Castleford, and, massive amount of terrace housing. But I would, I was doing a bit of investigation about how many people in them housing would have electric cars. We're not, we're talking about people who probably won't be on the ICE wages whatsoever. Maybe at this point can't afford them, to have them sort of cars, even though, maybe future-proofing, but by another 10, 15 years, God knows when, will something else be on board? So I'm just a little bit concerned that we're throwing money into an area that may not feel the benefit of it straight away.
Thank you, Chair. I'll maybe take a slightly different tack. I kind of hear what you're saying on that one, and I think it's, I guess there's a discussion to be had, isn't there, about whether the outlaying capital cost is then offset by the on cost, and that's probably something we could talk about all day long. I think, though, what I'm keen to see happen, and I know some of this is happening in terms of the discussions you're having with local authorities, is to make sure this is done absolutely properly. Build outs are a must. We can't take any more, pavement space away from people. We've got significant accessibility, and I think equality's stuff going on there if we do start going down in that direction. And I think we all know that build outs are best practice, but we all know that all of our local authorities have got their own challenges, whether it's heritage flags or whether it's lampposts at the front or the back of there's all of these variables, and I think you're right in working with the different local authorities in that sense to get a broader picture. I'm just wondering, sort of more broadly and as a strategic thinking around this, how can we make sure that, because I think it's critical, because at the moment in Calderdale we've got so many out of play, and that the network is so fractured, partially because of private interest. Just really want to make sure that it works in the round, and someone is taking some level of ownership over not just the implementation and the capital cost, but the ongoing monitoring and maintenance of them as well.
That's quite revolutionary stuff, isn't it, we're talking about here. Melanie.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to come back in, the first point about the areas of deprivation and whether there will be the anticipated uptake. That's why it's so important for us to work with Leeds University, who have been doing research into this, so that hopefully we are picking the right areas. And I think very good points from Councillor Patient as well about the funding mechanism, if you like, for this, because we need to attract private sector funding as well. And at the moment, we don't know what level that will be at, but we will absolutely be using the infrastructure fund to attract private sector funding, and we'd want to monitor the ongoing delivery of that and check that it's giving us what we want.
Oh, that's Councillor McLaughlin, Councillor Buckley, Councillor Bolt. Briefly, please, if you may.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just building on something that Councillor Patient was starting to talk about was the impact on inequalities. I'm looking for a bit of reassurance that thought is being given to the design so that we don't have cables crossing pavements and restricting accessibility for those that are disabled or pushing buggies.
Yeah, just taking up this point of private investment, it says here, although the total value of private investment is not known at this time. Well, we've been talking about these charging points for years, haven't we? Why is it not known? And what I'd like to know is, for instance, all the BP, the Shell garages, the Esso, have they been contacted? Have they been stimulated into providing charging points? And if not, why not?
I think it's shaping the market, isn't it? I think sorry, anyway, Councillor Bolt first, and then.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. There's an issue with EV charging that the existing things that we've seen rolled out through this authority often allocate spaces where it says taxis only when there are no taxis in the area, so precluding people from charging. I'm told by enforcement officers that those type of things, I don't know whether these on-street ones will be the same, where they have charging leads attached to them, are often prone to attacks by criminals stealing the wires and therefore render them unusable. And if we're doing them at home on the on-street parking, will they have any traffic regulation order in so that the people who are living in that area, who presumably there is something done so they're going where people live, can actually get to them? Because if there's no TRO, you might find the charging zone, if you like, blocked by non-EV vehicles.
So, Melanie.
Yeah. We will work with local authority officers in terms of enforcement and also accessibility. So obviously that's key. In terms of not knowing yet the level of private sector contribution, we are dictating to the market where we want to see these charge points. So there's a sequence, if you like, or an order of events that we want to say where the areas are and then engage further with the market. So we have done some market testing, and then we want to engage further to nail them down to the exact levels of investment that we would expect to see in certain areas. So we will come to confirm the funding in the next phase.
Okay, so I think that's something we're going to keep discussing, isn't it? Really, there's all the things that have been raised today are things that we come across in our post bags, really, in terms of casework and pavements, disability issues. I think it's worth emphasising that's been mentioned twice this afternoon about making sure that we don't have trip hazards, etc. So all those things, it's conflicting priorities on the highway, isn't it, really? So we'll see more of this in the future. But are we happy, therefore, to proceed on the basis to submit the bid and see what the learning is that we get out of that to progress forward? Yes, I'm seeing nods around the room, so I think we're happy to accept that then. Thank you very much, Melanie. So Melanie, are you also presenting on the last and final item here, project approvals? I think we've got 3 in here, have we?
Yeah, we've got a number of approvals for consideration, and I've got some officers from the project teams who are going to come up to the table and just do a very brief intro on these projects. But just before we go into the detail of the projects, it's on page 181, there's an additional approval here because DFT are asking us to review the milestones on a number of our ongoing and new programmes. So for our CRSTS programme, the Sustainable Transport Fund, we're part-way through that 5-year programme. We now have a LUF2, which is the Levelling Up Fund approval, which is round 2. And we've got Transforming Cities Fund, which is ongoing as well. and DFT have asked us to submit revised milestones for each of these programmes and to include monitoring and evaluation and how we are going to tackle that for our 5-year programme.
So I've got that on 129, am I right on that? Page 129?
Oh, sorry, on 181 of the pack, just at the beginning of the report,
Or have I got a different version here?
it does talk about this section. So we are being asked to revise the milestones which we've attached at Appendix 1, and then we go into the detail of the project. So at this stage, are members happy to approve the changes to the milestones so that we can then submit that to the Department for
Is
Transport?
it this table you wanted us to look at?
Yeah, it's the Appendix 1 table.
Is this table?
Yes. Yes.
Is there anything on here that's changed specifically since the last time we saw it?
We have some figures that have increased slightly on one project, but they've come down on another. So we do get a balanced programme in each case. We've got some milestones where we've explained that they've moved, and in most cases they've gone back, but for various reasons. But there shouldn't be any surprises to the headline figures. The headline figures are the same.
All I can see on here is dates, of course.
Yeah, the headline figures are the same, the programme
Yes.
remains the
So it's
same.
just the dates and reprofiled dates. Okay, fine.
Yes.
Well, I'm sure these have been worked on in conjunction with our authorities, haven't they?
They have, yeah.
I think we're saying yes to that. Nobody's saying no. So carry on, Melanie.
Yeah, so the next scheme is Leeds Healthier Streets, Space and Communities. So, Casey, did you want to come up? In fact, if the project teams come up to the table, just a very brief overview, please, so that members have got an idea of what the scheme's about.
Absolutely. I think we just want to make sure that, obviously we present it properly. And has anybody got any questions? So if people want to go from the first one then, Melanie, which is?
Yes, so this is Leeds Healthier Streets, Space and Communities.
So have anybody got any questions on that? Oh, Councillor Buckley just got in there before you. Go on, Councillor Buckley.
It was just a brief comment, really, that this mentions that the proposed interventions are expected to increase the uptake of walking, cycling and public transport. And we've seen in the report here today, the agenda, and also in the press recently, that walking is down since 2019, cycling is down since 2019. And at what point are we going to review this situation? Because if it's down, not since the pandemic, when it would obviously be down, but down compared to 2019, we must be doing something wrong.
So that's a wider question than just this project, isn't it? But I'll just let Councillor Carlow come back on that first. Thank you.
Yeah, I can come back on some. I mean, some of the figures in terms of journeys down, there are some fewer people travelling into work that are affecting quite a lot of the journeys that people are making. So in the same way that some of the people aren't going on the bus every day into town, people aren't walking into town every day, people aren't going on the bike into town every day. So some of that hits it. This project's a bit of a different one anyway that factors in some of that because previously we've looked at specific corridors or longer corridor works. This project's all around coming to community committees in Leeds and having conversations with members around what can be done in their local areas. So it will be around hearing from members about work that they want to happen in their communities and they think will improve. And I think that's something that we haven't been able to do before because we haven't had that flexibility of funding. But that's something you'll see through community committees for officers coming. So that's what we really want to talk about around the journeys that you know about and you'll get in your post bag, same as me, the journeys that people tell us they're taking. Because I think there has been a shift from the journeys they may have used to take in 2019. And this will hopefully allow us to move on to that new way of working, I guess.
Councillor Hutchinson, briefly.
I would say that although there's a road maintenance fund that's in no way adequate. There is no fund for repair and maintenance of footways, of pavements. And so in a lot of places, the state of the pavement infrastructure has become a lot worse, which is an absolute way of reducing people's walking. So I would hope that that would be recognised as a potential contributor to reduction in walking journeys.
Thank you. That's just linked to local authority austerity, isn't it? The funding cuts to local authorities for the last 13 years, I'm afraid. Any more questions or comments on this particular project? No? I'm happy to propose this. Can I see all those in favour, please show? Thank you, that seems to be carried. Thank you. Next one.
The next one is the Lough 2 project. It's the A639 Park Road. So we want to move from outline business case to full business case on this one.
Any questions or comments on this one? No? I'm happy to propose this then. Can I see all those in favour, please show? Thank you, that is carried. Next.
The next one is A629 Phase 2, which is Halifax Town Centre. So the proposal here is to proceed from full delivery, full business case, which is decision point 4, into delivery, which is activity 5.
Any questions on this, Councillor Page?
Thank you, Chair. Just briefly to welcome the significant amount of investment into Halifax. I know it's going to make a massive difference, and we're seeing lots of different regeneration projects in and around the town. So I'm sure it's going to keep me busy over the next few years.
Yeah, and that's the benefit of devolution, isn't it? It's giving us opportunities to really regenerate the places that everybody relies on in West Yorkshire. So it's a real positive. So I think that's a recommendation to approve this. Is anybody? I'll have to second that. All those in favour, please show. That is carried. Thank you. Next.
And then the final scheme for consideration is the Rail Park and Ride programme, where we provide commuter spaces at rail stations to avoid cars coming right into the centre of our towns and cities. And we've got a change request for 3 station car parks, Steeton and Silsden, Normanton and Moorthorpe, and the overall increase to programme costs as well.
Thank you. Now, obviously, having read the paper, it does seem to the very high cost, particularly at the Steeton and Silsden one. Have you got some explanation for that increase in cost, please?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start, and the officers may want to chip in as well. Originally at Steeton and Silsden, this was going to be a surface car park, and there was significant demand on this line and on that area to increase the provision. We have been able to accommodate a decked car park on that site, but there have been delays to getting the car park design completed because we've changed the scope, and also getting the access and the permissions from Network Rail because it's very close in certain areas to the operational railway line. And some of those delays have meant that we've got caught up in the massive increase that we've seen in inflation costs. So we've doubled the scope, but we've also then got caught up with these higher inflation costs, which have then come back in the tendered prices. And there's been some unforeseen activities on site during construction as well, with finding of ammunition from a former ammunition factory. So you couldn't make that one up. But there are various reasons, and overall for the programme, when we started with the proposals for this programme and the business case, we worked on the basis that each car parking space would cost approximately 30,000. Now, this is at the higher end, but there are others that have come in lower. And actually, as a programme overall, it's looking like 31,500 per space. So it's slightly higher, but given that we've had COVID and inflation, we're coming in pretty close to what we predicted. So it does look quite stark in the report, but there are very good reasons. I don't know if the project team want to come in. Is there anything I've missed?
Thanks, Melody. No, I think those are the main challenges that we faced. Delays did happen on site as we were going through, but they have been worked through very closely by the project team. There is good collaboration across all partners and all in Network Rail to find solutions. So working as quickly as we could to address those delays, but those are the key points that have come through. And the funding we're asking for is still within the overall funding envelope of the programme itself. So the actual Park and Ride programme is still coming in on budget. It's the cost increases for these projects that we're looking at.
I mean, I think it's just, obviously we've started so we're finished kind of thing really, isn't it? However, I think we do need to look at this going forward, whether, you know, because obviously this is money that can be spent elsewhere, etc. So obviously we've got a policy about Park and Ride and rail stations, and there is an absolute, you know, valid reason to do that. The more people can get off the roads then onto public transport, the better. However, there needs to be a limit in that in terms of how much that costs. Councillor Bolt.
Thanks, Chair. I'd be interested if somebody could explain the process of choosing stations. Obviously, the basis is to get cars, give somewhere cars to park, get people so they're not driving. So when we're looking at the ones that are chosen, as we go with TransPennine rate upgrade, and they refuse to provide additional parking at stations that they're upgrading, saying that's not their remit, it's down to WICA and the local authorities. So there's no additional parking being provided at Murfield. There's basic parking being provided at Ravensthorpe, despite the fact that there's 5,000 houses on the Dewsbury Riverside. Whose job is it to put forward suggestions for additional car parking to cope with the increased demand? If Kirklees were as forward thinking as some of the other authorities, and we just heard about SIL, then they could use SIL to underpin infrastructure improvements. Otherwise, they're dependent on Section 106, which we know developers are reluctant to pay. So how are the stations identified? Is it by station usage, or is it just by a beauty contest from local authorities?
Thank you. I mean, obviously through SIL and 106, you've seen here the significant sums involved, so I'm not sure actually it's always sustainable through a planning application process. But Councillor, Melanie, do you want?
Yes, thank you. There were a number of factors that we looked at. Demand was one of them, and we were monitoring how full the existing car parks were or the streets around the station. Safety was another issue because cars parked, well, you'll know at Murfield, on the road, making it unsafe for, for cars to go down the street. So we do need to try to get cars off the street and make it safer for those pedestrians and cyclists and fellow motorists in that area, in that vicinity. So it comes down to money. So yes, we looked at demand and we have made some improvements at Murfield, but not to the extent that we'd originally planned because of the TRU plans. And we also will look at, initially for phase one, we looked at where land was in public ownership because we thought that might be quicker. Working with some of the third parties that we've been working with, that hasn't necessarily been quicker. So there were a number of factors that we took into account, but now it is coming down to financial pressures as well.
So there's a business case behind each of them, isn't it? It's got to be over one really, and if it's under one, then it's not a viable proposition, just as all our projects are. Councillor Khan.
Can I welcome the investment at Normanton? It's the ward I represent at Wakefield. Is it the same reasons for the increase of obviously the amount of money we want for the project, or is it different reasons behind it?
Some of it is the same. It's delays, largely hit by COVID when we were able to actually start our project on site, which led to some repricing exercises and working with, you'll be aware, there were tenants on the site as well, which we had to take account of, and that lengthened the programme. So similar sort of story, but slightly different reasons behind it. It's delays getting on site that have increased the prices, yeah.
Lovely. I don't see anybody else indicating questions. Or Councillor Fern.
Yes, following the comment from Councillor Bolt, I can assure him that Ravensthorpe and Murfield will not be forgotten going forward. But can I ask about maintenance of these car parks that we're doing going forward? Because you've said you're putting up a deck on some of them. Who will be responsible going forward for maintenance?
Yeah, at the moment on the car parks that we're providing, the rail operator that runs the station is also maintaining the car parks. I don't know if the project team have got anything further to comment on that, if there are any anomalies there.
No, there's no anomalies there. The three schemes in question, the train operating company will operate and manage the car parks once completed. Thank you.
No, it will pass over to Network Rail because it will be part of the operational railway, and then they will lease that to the train operator with their contract. So that's why previously we have, well, up until this point, we've always stipulated that the car parks need to be free of charge because we've gifted the land in effect. But it's quite a complicated setup. But at the moment, yes, the train operators are responsible for the maintenance of those assets.
Any further questions? No? So it looks like obviously there's ifs and buts with this, but we accept we're on site doing these things, so they need to be completed. So we'll recommend that. Is everybody okay with that? Please show. Yes. Thank you very much. That is carried. Is there anything else on this agenda? There are obviously some approvals there from the Combined Authority, which are for noting. So we've gone over a little bit today, but thank you very much for your patience and have a good evening. Thank you very much, everybody. This meeting is closed.